no matter where you go in the world, when you attend Adventist meetings, and I'm not talking about evangelistic meetings, I'm talking about our business meetings, which seem to go on day after day after day and night after night. Those who were in the meeting last night will understand. Wherever you go, there's a certain thing that happens in the course of meetings, and that is that there's a level of energy with which the meetings begin, and as meetings progress, there's also a progression of fatigue, both emotional and physical. And that seems to reach its bottom on the second last day. You know, listen, you look around the room on the second last day, you will find more yawning in the meeting than on the last day, because on the last day, we've recovered our energies and we know that things are going to come to an end. So welcome to the second last day. Yeah. Assuming that you are freshest in the morning and that you have recovered from the lateness of last night, I'm going to stimulate and provoke your thinking for a few moments this morning. For you remember that a lawyer once came to Jesus and asked him a question, testing him and saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment of the law?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." Now, I have heard a lot of sermons, and I suppose I have even tried to preach some about loving God with your heart. I have not heard too many about loving God with your soul, because that is a controversial topic in Seventh-day Adventist theology. And I'm not sure how we would frame a message around the idea of loving God with your soul. But I also cannot remember hearing much discourse about loving God with your mind. How do we love God with our minds? I suppose if we thought about it for a while, we would agree that loving God with the mind means thinking deeply about what we believe, thinking deliberately, thinking articulately about our beliefs, our convictions, and the message of Revelation. So I want to explore with you in the few moments remaining to us some thoughts about loving God with the mind, a Christian's worldview. Now, this may be more cerebral than the messages that we might normally deal with, but I think there is a challenge that comes to us in those words of Jesus to love God with all your mind. I think it takes effort, it takes intentionality, and it takes time. And I want to focus for these few moments this morning on the issue of our belief in creation, the creation story, and all that happened shortly after creation. Because in a sense, this is the Christian worldview. Now, there are several medical professionals in the group this morning, and so I need to tell you up front, I am not going to be very analytical when I say that you have a lens in your eye, or each of your eyes, if you have two eyes. Now, the truth of the matter is you cannot see the lens of your eye. Even with a mirror, you cannot see the lens. But without the lens of your eye, you cannot see anything. You couldn't see if the color of your socks matched. You couldn't see the traffic light at the intersection. I have been with drivers who have lenses and still couldn't see the traffic light at the intersection. If the lens of your eye is functioning normally, you should be able to see things with clarity. You would be able to distinguish between a man and a tree, a black and white cat and a black and white soccer ball, a 100 rupee note and a 1,000 rupee note. And if the muscles that stretch and compress the lens become a little bit lazy or weary of well-doing, you will probably need what I need to help my lenses see things clearly. We use our lenses in the eyes without consciously thinking about them. You don't hear somebody say, please let me look at your book. Let me take my eye and shape my lens so that I can see your book. No. We do that processing automatically, subconsciously. We use our lenses without thinking. We cannot see them, but without them we can see nothing. Here's where I move out of the medical field. Our mind also has a lens through which we understand or see non-physical realities. It is called our worldview. Our worldview is the means by which we determine what is real, what is important, what is unreal and unimportant. Our worldview answers the questions of where we came from, how we should live, what we should expect in the future. How did we get to this point? And why is it important that in loving God with our mind, we think about a worldview? The truth is, we live in a time of clashing worldviews, and much of what is happening in our world is simply the outworking of ideas that have been gradually, sometimes alarmingly, gaining strength in our society. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, wrote in one of his books that he was firmly convinced that the killing fields of Treblinka and Majdanek and several others were not created in the offices of government. But it was his conviction that these events of the Holocaust were the outworking of what was happening in university classrooms decades earlier, under the teaching of atheist professors. We live in a time of clashing worldviews. We live in a time when the power of the media, the power of the university, and the power of the government are the major centers of influence in our culture. And in these major centers of influence, there is very little serious religious discussion. Loving God with the mind. There are a number of worldviews that are very prevalent throughout the world. Perhaps the one that is becoming most dominant because of the advance in science is that of naturalism. The view that the universe of physical objects, properties, events, and processes that are well established by scientific forms of investigation is all there is. or ever will be. There is nothing outside of nature. There's the empiricist worldview that says all knowledge is derived from the senses. What we see, hear, touch, hold, weigh, and measure. There is materialism that insists that anything beyond matter is not real. Or pantheism that says anything besides the all-encompassing one is not real. Not real. 20th century atheist Bertrand Russell gave expression to the angst of the day when he wrote in his autobiography, "No dungeon was ever constructed so dark and narrow as that which imprisons us. There is darkness without, and when I die, there will be darkness within. There is no splendor, no vastness anywhere, only triviality for a moment, and then nothing." How depressing. How depressing. And yet that is a worldview of millions. If you were to ask a fellow church member, why do Seventh-day Adventists think it is important to believe in the story of creation? I suspect that 99 times out of 100, the first answer you will hear is that from the story of creation we get, oh, come on, you're so silent, you've all gone to sleep, the Sabbath. Okay? Creation is what creates for us the defense of the Sabbath. Such an answer would be true, but it is far, far from the only answer to the question, why do we believe in creation? The creation story, really creation and fall, form the foundation of the Christian worldview. The complete Christian worldview encompasses the creation, the fall, the recovery or redemption, and restoration or recreation. This morning we have time, and not enough time really, to think for a few moments only about creation. As we look at some of the basic concepts in this Christian worldview, we will come to compare these concepts with ideas contained in what are other dominant worldviews in our society, and we will begin to understand the trajectory upon which world culture is moving. But maybe a word of caution before we begin, and I shared with you on Sabbath this quotation from Ellen White. The Bible, perfect as it is in its simplicity, does not answer to the great ideas of God. For infinite ideas cannot be perfectly embodied in finite vehicles of thought. What a penetrating idea about how we approach Scripture and receive the messages of Scripture. Well, obviously Adventists believe in creation, and we are among a rapidly declining number of people in the world who believe in a historical, short chronology creation. We've had these debates going on even in our own faith community over the last, 10, 15 years. And part of that whole exercise will culminate in an action, a recommendation coming before the General Conference session to make some amendments in fundamental belief number 6. And I'm not really wanting to go there today. We'll get there in the business session when we review the fundamental belief recommendations. What I hope that we do not do as a church is stop thinking deeply about what creation means to the Seventh-day Adventist worldview. Why do we believe in creation? It's the unquestionable assertion of Scripture. Full stop. But what does belief in creation mean for the Christian? Most of the time, we spend our energy talking about the how and the what of creation without thinking about its meaning for Christians. And so I want to share with you this morning 7 foundational concepts that come to us from the story of creation, those first few chapters of Genesis. The first concept is that it is from the story of creation that we get our foundational picture of God. He is outside of creation. He is not part of creation, as pantheism would suggest. God exists outside of creation. He is above creation. He interacts with it. There is someone in charge at the head of this universe. The owner and creator is the one who established the physical universe, its laws of operation, and the laws of human existence. God brings order out of chaos, establishes systems, and defines relationships. In our society, the dominant explanation for our existence is evolution. Darwinian evolution says that matter or stuff is all there is. Matter is made up of atoms and molecules and energy and motion. And the interaction of atoms, molecules, and energy resulted in everything there is. The Christian worldview says this is not the case. There is someone in charge of the universe. We learn in our picture of God that creation is the result of benevolent, deliberate, designed, consultative activity of God. Creation is not the result of some conflict among the gods. Creation is the result of design and benevolence. I wish we could talk a lot longer about that, but I see the clock also. Number 2, since God is the creator and interacts with his creation, he is also the source of objective knowledge concerning life. Why do you worship God if he is not the creator? If he is not the creator, what reason is there for listening, considering, or obeying anything that he says? If he is not the ultimate authority in the universe, why should he be worshiped? If God exists but is not the creator of the universe, he is merely a demigod, one we might choose to worship, but not the ultimate. And therefore, worshiping him is a form of idolatry. The Christian claim that God is worthy of our worship is a claim that can only be made on the basis of the validity of the Genesis story. God created. Otherwise, there is no reason for worship. Number 3, the only basis of genuine human rights and dignity is a fully biblical worldview. Because Christianity, the Christian worldview begins with a transcendent creator. It does not idolize any part of creation, but it understands from the creation story that human beings were specially created for relationship to God and for superintendency over the earth. Individuality and relationship are built into the very essence of what it means to be human. Philosopher Rousseau wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." What he meant by that was not political chains of slavery or economics. What he had in mind was the oppressive relationships of family, marriage, church, and workplace. These designed relationships in creation, Rousseau takes to be the chains that put human beings in bondage. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that in every decision, a person stands completely alone. There are no moral absolutes. There are no values in this world apart from my interest, my pleasure, my desires, and my satisfaction. And that's why he became famous for his statement, "Hell is other people." Because all that is important in life is what I'm interested in. And your interests are an obstruction to mine. In the creation story, the Bible presents human beings not as disconnected, solitary individuals living among the trees, but as a couple, male and female, related from the beginning. This means that relationships are not simply the result of autonomous choices. They are part of the moral order of things and part of our true nature. You see how important creation is to our whole approach to living. Number 4, from the creation story we learn a correct perspective of work, especially physical labor. The ancient Greeks taught that the gods made human beings for work in order that they themselves would be able to avoid it. Work was viewed as demeaning. To the Greeks, work was a curse and nothing else. Aristotle said, "Some people are born to be slaves." From the creation story, we learn that work is foundational to our participation in and enjoyment of life. In fact, work should occupy a major portion of our time. We're not commanded to rest and relax more than we work. We're not even asked to balance work and rest. Surprisingly, we are told to work more than we rest. Have we not discovered that too much rest makes one restless? Just listen to people who have all they need, yet lack something useful to do. Listen to people in a nursing home, many of whom will lament the fact that they have nothing meaningful to do that allows them to feel useful. While recognizing that life in this world required work, the Greeks believed that not all work was created equal. Work that used the mind rather than the muscles was nobler, less beastly. And the highest form of work was the most cognitive and the least manual. But there's a very different perspective coming from the Bible. In the Genesis story, only man is set apart, and given a job description. And the Bible sees all work as distinguishing human beings and elevating them to a place of dignity. Philip Jensen says, if God came into the world, what would he be like? For the ancient Greeks, he would be a philosopher king. The ancient Romans might have looked for a just and noble statesman. But how does the God of Hebrews come into the world? He comes as a laborer, a carpenter. And perhaps more than anything else today that I would like to emphasize, I think we need to understand the consecration of every calling in life. Every calling for the sake of human community and the mission of God in this world is sacred and has dignity. I want to dispel the idea that ministerial work or being the president is more holy than teaching math or fixing machinery or cutting the grass. Because the creation story tells us of the dignity of labor. I could wax long on that. I have a son-in-law. When we visit Washington State, where our children live, I often have the opportunity of speaking at the church there. And my son-in-law says to me that when I stop by 12 o'clock, he never gets enough sleep. I could wish you all a son-in-law like that. Yeah. So I need to watch the clock. If you don't get enough sleep, continue it in session this morning. Number 5, the creation story tells us that there is a moral quality or dimension to life. Acts of human freedom spoiled, indeed broke the relationship with God. And the consequence of this brought moral ruination and death in our world. Freedom is only freedom in the context of an environment with boundaries. A fish is free in water. It is not free in air. The creation story introduces us to the significance of moral boundaries and of relationships and of the consequence of exercising human freedom outside the boundaries in which we are intended to live. So that there is brokenness in relationship with God. There is brokenness between people. There is brokenness between human beings and the rest of creation. And maybe out of that, we can make a very good case for Christians to be environmentalists. Point number 6. We learn from the creation story and the fall that there is a linear and purpose-driven view of history. We are not part of some endless, purposeless cycle of existence. We are part of a grand narrative, a great story that begins in Genesis 1:1 and proceeds through the dark periods of Earth's history to a grand and glorious climax at the end of Revelation. Creation introduces us to a view of history that is unlike any other worldview. And number 7, belief in creation is the only worldview that fits the reality of human experience. It is the only worldview. For we well know that people who hold other views will always find the necessity to live in conflict with other worldviews, because what they know by experience and what they profess to believe will be in conflict. People who hold to the philosophy of materialism or Darwinism will find that they live in ways that contradict those views. Some years ago, an atheist, evolutionist philosopher wrote in a science journal, that on the basis of his worldview, a baby that was born mentally or physically deficient had less right to live than a dog or a rabbit who was born without physical deformities. You see the impact of the Christian worldview? That says you are of value, not by your physical structure or your mental makeup or capacity. You are of value simply by virtue of being created in the image of God. Other worldviews are false keys to life. We can be absolutely confident when talking with non-believers that they themselves know things are not accounted for. All realities of human experience are not adequately accounted for in their worldview. They will not be able to live consistently on the basis of their own worldview. Only a Christian can live consistently in light of his or her worldview. You know, during the invasion of Iraq, the Iraqi Minister of Information appeared daily on the media, standing before microphones, television cameras, etc. And he repeated over and over, there are no American infidels in Baghdad, never. And at the same time, a few blocks away, television cameras were recording the takeover of government buildings by American soldiers. This morning is that we should read the first few chapters of Genesis not just to comprehend how God made the world. I don't think we can comprehend that. But to absorb something of the meaning of creation. For as we more fully understand the meaning of creation, we will know how to live in a world of conflicting worldviews. When we understand what it means to live God intellectually with our minds, we will be able to stand up for God's truth and honor when that is challenged, and to do so with carefully thought out answers. I wish, as a church, when we came to preparing our messages about the Sabbath, we couched them